Make sure it's going live.
I see a live thing in my corner, so.
Okay. All right, we're good now.
Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Super excited to be here. Welcome to the first night.
I see a live thing in my corner, so.
Okay. All right, we're good now.
Okay.
All right.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to the first night of our hashtag ESPEChat Summit, presented by ESPEChat. We are very excited this evening to have a great presenter. My name is Ross Chakrian, and I'll be your moderator this evening. We want to first thank the Phys Pedagogy crew for being the inspiration for our hashtag ESPEChat team to create our own Phys Ed Summit like they have done in the past. They've been a big help along the way with this process. And a big shout out in particular goes to our own Matthew Bassett, who's been the main man behind the scenes here at ESPEChat, putting this whole event together. So he's been working really hard for the last few months. So you can reach out to him on Twitter or social media some way and shoot him a thank you. That would be awesome because he has been really working hard on this. So tonight we're using a ton of technology during the session. And there's a chance that some things might go wrong along the way. This year we're trying out some new things. So if there is something that goes wrong, try to stay tuned on the chats side of the YouTube video here in the live chat feed. That'll be where I kind of update you with anything that you need to know in terms of the tech stuff if there is an issue. Also, you can use that chat feature on the right side of the screen there to post questions, comments, anything, and I'll be relaying those to Amanda as she is doing her presentation when we can fit those questions in. If you're using social media tonight, we would like you to use two hashtags, hashtag ESPEChat and hashtag PhysEdSummit for your posts. With all of that said, I would like to introduce your presenter this evening, Dr. Amanda Stanec. The title of her session that you're going to be watching this evening is Assessment for Learning, Supporting Students' Physical Literacy Through Quality Assessment Practices. This session is going to provide a brief overview of physical literacy and will examine best assessment practices for elementary physical education. You will leave this session understanding how quality assessment practices guide instruction so that they can optimally support students' physical literacy journey. So Amanda, without any more ado, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to, since I didn't get a chance to do my hair for this evening's presentation, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right away with you all. Thanks for tuning in. And let me move this over here. So, hopefully you are seeing. Ross, can you just type in the chat to see if you see my title slide for me, please? Or let me know, just a yes or a no. Got it. Okay, great. So I'm going to get started. So as Ross said, the title of the session is Assessment for Learning, Supporting Students' Physical Literacy Journey Through Quality Assessment Practices. But before I can really get going, I need to thank the team behind this amazing summit. Yes, our friends from Phys Pedagogy, who I was lucky to have Sarah G.H., one of those important members in the flesh in my home this evening, along with Mike Doyle, who's not a Phys Pedagogy person, but an amazing professional. And all the people listed up here are responsible for this amazing chat that happens each week. And to think that they do this over and above the work that they do for their school communities and after school experiences, and then with family time and everything, it's really remarkable. And so I wanted to just give you a slide to make sure that you are following their amazing work, and to really sincerely thank them for all they do for our amazing community. I was really interested in assessment. It actually stemmed early in my teaching career. It was probably the year 2000. And I was approached the division head at the school I taught at in Richmond, Virginia. And I was like, you know, our kids need physical education every day. And he's like, why? And I was like, well, because it's so good for the body and they need it. And this is why. And I was telling him all of the science behind it. And he's like, yeah, but but how do you know that they're not getting what they need in the amount of time that you see them? And I was like, well, they need daily quality physical education. And he's like, okay, why? And my last name wasn't Stanec at the time, it was Stewart. And so he was like, come on now, Stewie, but why? But why? And he kept pushing me, and his name was Charlie Blair. And I really appreciated that, because it really forced me to step back and look at my own assessment practices, which admittedly were very antiquated, and they didn't make physical education more enjoyable for the students. And it didn't really, it was mostly summative, and it didn't really inform my next lesson plan. And so it wasn't until I went back to school a couple times that I started to understand how assessment can really support learning. And that's where I became very interested and passionate about assessment in physical education. So as we look forth, this image just makes me really sad, and I think it's what really fuels me to do what I do on a daily basis and in my profession, but also as a parent and a community member, looking to find ways to stop normalizing this, to stop sticking kids in a bubble and putting them in front of screens or giving them handheld devices. And here we all are talking on technology, and we all feel like we're best friends through Twitter. And so, like, I get the fact that technology is great and it plays a role, but I want to be very clear in that I am loud and proud that I think we are totally excessive on how we think that we're motivating kids to learn through technology. Kids are also motivated by candy, but it doesn't make it right. And so while, of course, we've had discussions on how to make it meaningful and it should only enhance learning, I'm still going to push us more and say physical education has a bigger role in terms of how to really help them learn to unplug and to realize that what we're doing, we need to slow down on the tech and really like step back. I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater when we're trying to be innovative in education, and sometimes got rid of some of the golden stuff, which is this like contact with each other and in person, and letting go of the tech. So we live in a society where we say kids are lazy. We say they don't want to move. We say they only want screens and they don't want video games. But like, who invented video games, and who's forcing technology on them? Who built this bubble around them? Who built roads without separate bike paths and then put legislation in place that disallows kids to ride their bikes on sidewalks, even if the streets nearby aren't bike friendly? Who punished with exercise? Who held recess back from kids? Who rewarded kids with high junk food and high in calories and low in nutrients? And who hung the signs up in the neighborhoods that says no skateboarding, no biking, no, basically nothing other than walking slowly? So we did, adults did. And so it's frustrating now that we've done this to kids over the last couple decades. And so what can we do to bust out of that? And I love how in Dr. Rady's new book, Go Wild, his newer book, there's this fact of the matter is we spent in physical education so much time talking about fighting obesity and not enough time talking about empowering students. I don't know about you, but when I'm waking up in the morning to go for my run, I'm not thinking about obesity. I'm thinking about the fact that I am so much more efficient when I get that workout in. I'm thinking about the fact that I'm simply a nicer human when I get that workout in. I feel like I can handle more when I get, it's like drawing back from those days of getting knocked down in the soccer field, but getting right back up. You can draw from that once we move our bodies, because as this quote says, we are designed to be wild. And by living tamely, we make ourselves sick and unhappy. And so just really thinking about this as we go forward in our communities, our school communities, and our broader communities, about the importance of physical education. And I promise we will get to assessment here really soon. But this is why, it is assessment for learning to support physical literacy. And when we look at this diagram, I really think that it's a nice visual to help people who don't understand what physical literacy is, or maybe they think it is just fundamental movement, or maybe they just think it's athleticism. It's really not. There's a lot to physical literacy. And each strand, if you will, of silk contributes to the whole. But you can have little gaps here and there. I like to show this visual to physical education teachers, because it's not just our role to support physical literacy journey. Parents have a role. Youth sport has a role. Affordable community youth sport particularly has a role. Recreation has a role. just school policy around recess and not holding recess back from kids, and extracurricular intramurals before and after school or during lunchtime. All of these things help to support a person's physical literacy journey. And so while your school may not be perfect, and I haven't seen a perfect school yet, it doesn't mean that we can't make positive change to support every child's physical literacy. And with that, just as a review to the definition, to make sure we're all working from the same definition, physical literacy, of course, is the competence and confidence to be physically active in a wide variety of environments. And that relates to land, ice, snow, and water. And of course, snow is more easier to come by in my native Nova Scotia than it is here where I live now in St. Louis, Missouri. But as much as within our control, if it means that the different terrains of land, if it means that we're going from the gymnasium floor out into the field or nearby wooded area, or for some trails, or if it means that we do make a couple field trips to a pool or to a rink, if we don't have those that are attached to our school, which most don't, then so be it. But if your program is not adhering to that piece of the definition, to build competence and confidence to be physically active in a wide variety of environments, then we have to think about ways to step back and really do that. And the other thing to realize is physical literacy, it's not a destination, it's a journey throughout the lifespan. And also it's individualized. And so somebody with a disability, or somebody at a beginner level, or somebody with a certain special need, they can absolutely develop as a physically literate person. And it also means that, I love to use this example of my grandmother. She passed away a few years ago, but her name was Catherine, my nan. And she went from, when I was a little girl, I remember seeing her walk down the road in rural Nova Scotia that she lived on. It was 2 kilometers from my house. And then as I was growing older and she was growing older, that trek went then to like her half-mile driveway from her farmhouse. So she would walk up the driveway and back down. Then as, again, I got older and even had a child and named after her, and then I noticed her walking went from one side of her home to the other several times a day. And when I talked to her about it, she told me that it was to keep her bones strong, because she wanted to maintain balance so that she wouldn't fall, knowing that her bones were weaker and she could potentially break a hip with one misstep. And so she was making choices to move her body to benefit her health, but it was also for others, and because she didn't want to be a burden on people if she fell, and she wouldn't have been. She was so worshipped by us. But this is the idea of physical literacy can look like that at 97 is a physically literate person who's choosing to move her body to benefit herself and potentially others. And so I want to just remove that idea that physical literacy only pertains to the best athlete and so forth, because it is very individualized. I had a child a year ago, so moving in my body over the last year looked very different each month in the last 12 months. It doesn't mean that I'm more physically literate now because I might be more fit. It just, physical literacy, it means I was determined to stay on my journey, right? And when we look in schools and we look at the journey throughout the lifespan, and we see the importance of these K to 12 years, and just like with reading, we teach kids to read at kindergarten, because that is when their brain is most ready to learn how to read. And that is why with the fundamental movements in physical literacy, it is so important that they are also taught in these early years. And so while physical literacy is not just fundamental movement, you certainly need those building blocks to be able to combine them, and then combine more complex movements and with each other, and then to put in authentic environments to really make sure kids have that physical literacy, the foundation to support their journey throughout their lifespan. But if we're missing this opportunity for quality, optimal physical education during these formative years, we are missing a very, very critical strand of silk in our physical literacy web. And so I want us to really think about that. I have seen, there's been times where I visited schools, a second grade school, I'll never forget, well, a second grade class, a seventh grade class, and a ninth grade class one year. So I was at an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school when I was a professor observing student teachers one day, and all three were doing dribbling a basketball. And it led me to be pretty disheartened, because it's not that skill's not a valuable fundamental movement skill, but why are we doing the same thing all the way around? And if we want to have more PE in our schools, we need to make sure it's quality. And what I'm saying here tonight is that quality assessment can really help to ensure that our programs are strong and our kids are learning. When you look at assessment, when you just kind of look it up online, it'll tell you the evaluation or estimation of the nature, quality, or ability of someone or something. And I like to kind of change it. I mean, making sure you see it crossed out and not underlined here. Because, you know, they had synonyms that it was evaluation, judgment, rating, estimation, opinion. And that's not what we mean by assessment in physical education. And if you're tuning into this on a Sunday night, you probably know this, but I wanted to just share it to make sure we're all on the same page. So related to assessment and quality physical education, I want us to think about mentorship, coaching, opportunity, growth. You know, three-dimensional coaching. My friend Heath Esslinger, he's a wrestling coach at Chattanooga, and he did a presentation one time I was lucky enough to listen to, and this is so great. You know what? If you remember anything from tonight, you're going to remember this, and I love this. He says, "What's a coach? You know, where did that term come from?" And he had a picture of like a carriage, a coach on the thing, and he's like, a coach back in the day was something that took a person of importance from point A to point B. Which is why I always like, don't call me doctor, call me Coach Stanec, because I want to be known as the person who helped get a person of importance, every one of our students, from point A to point B. And assessment is going to help us do that. I was coaching grade 2 girls soccer all fall, and I told them that in the first night. I was like, you know, as your coach, you're a person of importance to me, and my job is to help you to get better. And I want us to use assessment as the means to coach our students and use this language with them so that they understand why we're assessing them. They understand the purpose of the assessment, and then we use it to make ourselves better as coaches. And, you know, I am not somebody who thinks it's an insult to be called a coach as a PE teacher, because I love where the term came from. And we're seeing more the coaching used more in business, that model, and we're seeing it more instructional coaches and the important role that they play in our school districts. So I just want to throw that out there to you. But looking at it as feedback and analysis and mentorship and opportunity and growth, and take away this judgment and rating and appraisal and opinion, and just use it then to help us increase our teaching effectiveness, increase our student learning, increase our student motivation. And I can tell you, when I started focusing on this young in my career, I liked teaching way more, because I saw my students were laughing more. I was laughing more. I can tell you about a time, and I'll never forget it. I was doing a badminton kind of circuit thing in the class. That's scholarly, a badminton kind of circuit thing. And I was doing this session, and the kids were literally sprinting over to me like, what do I need to get better on? Because they knew I had criteria, and they were playing a round robin tournament, and they were still running over to me. And it's, what do I need to do better? They weren't saying like who won, who's the top of it, who has the most points. They wanted to know what they needed to do to improve upon their performance so that they were better matching the criteria that we had established. And so that was really fun. Although I don't know about you, and I'm not knocking my alma mater, because I think it was most of the schools at this time, when I was taught to teach badminton and teach assessment, it was how many times can you serve and get the shuttle to land in the hula hoop on the other side in the back opposite corner, right? So they're looking, or really just below the net. So while I was taught that that's what we were supposed to do, that wasn't fun for me as a PE major, and my classes weren't fun for that. And I wanted to share this little slide with you, and the source is at the bottom, but it just talks about assessment for learning, how it enables teachers to use information about students' knowledge, understanding, and skills. That's what we're really talking about tonight. Teachers provide feedback to students about their learning and how to improve. There's assessment as learning, which involves students in the learning process, where they monitor their progress, ask questions, practice their skills. Students use self-assessment and teacher feedback, what we're also talking about tonight. I love this because this slide alone is a great little way for you to check in, to give yourself feedback on your performance of assessing your students now. The more we give ownership to our students at all ages, elementary as well, the better. They have to be taught how to self-assess. They have to be taught how to peer assess. And it should only be used in self and peer assessment should only be used as a way to gather information. Those data points should not be used to evaluate students. But then there's also assessment of learning, which assists teachers to use evidence of student learning to assess student achievement against learning goals and standards. And that's, again, looking at our broader picture. We might have in the past called that summative assessment, and we'll kind of get to in a moment if it's something we want to still do or not. I am talking really fast, and I feel very energetic right now. I hope I'm keeping you awake. I'm watching the chat thing on the side. In case you do have questions, you can slow me down at any point if you want to ask a question. I'm sure maybe Ross is probably monitoring this on Twitter as well. So don't feel shy to tell me to stop or anything like that. If we get Ross on here saying the questions, we can listen to his Strong Island accent. Might be better than the Canadian one. So as we look at a couple things about assessment that I want us to be really clear about, is it's not something extra, and it should never be viewed as an add-on. It's a key part of learning and teaching. Again, I reflect back to my pre-service teaching years, and I was taught assessment at the very end, or like 2 courses into pedagogy, and that's wrong. Assessment, when I was a professor, assessment was taught on day 1 with how to write a lesson plan. Assessment was included in it, because what's happened over time is we have come as professionals, of course, probably not the people like you who want to listen to someone as boring as me at this hour on a Sunday, but we viewed it as something extra. And so when something's viewed as extra, it immediately becomes something that's stressful. And when we weren't taught how to do it in a quality manner, it's not enjoyable for us, because we know the kids aren't enjoying it. So while we might be well-intended trying some, with assessment early on in our career, I understand how maybe it's like with doing cognitive or paper pencil assessments at elementary, you're like, I don't have time to pass out all that paper. Why would I take time? Why would I waste my time with that? And my response would be, you don't have time to do that unless you're doing it very, very efficiently and effectively and in collaboration with classroom teachers. So it's not something that should ever be viewed as an extra or an add-on. A quick tip so I don't forget later. Your teachers, the classroom teachers, may work in PLNs as a grade level. Find out if they do. Find out what they're doing in writing. Find out if they would be willing to weave in a little check-ins or exit slips, or merging writing practices, or personal narratives related to physical education or physical activity. Find these things out and see if there are ways that you can collaborate with them to have the work more meaningful for the students. And I know at Red Hill Elementary School in Albemarle County, Virginia, when I taught there, the teachers were very enthusiastic about doing that. It made it more meaningful for the students. And in turn, I learned some problem areas that they were having. For example, there was, I remember there were some kids having problems distinguishing between even and odd numbers. And I was able to weave that in to my physical education classes. There were students who were having, their spelling words. I could weave that in when we were doing dribbling with feet. We could do it in the shape, the letters and their spelling words. And they were so excited to do that. How do you know that, Coach? How do you know we're doing that? Well, I know everything. I have eyes in the back of my head, so you better be very compassionate and active at recess time. And they would just look at me with no teeth and grin, and it was very cute. But this is just some things to think about. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm It's so weird to present to a computer screen. So the other thing is, probably don't need to know this, but I know I need to say it so I'll sleep well tonight. We want students to improve, but we should never assess them on it because they're really smart and they won't try their best the first time if you know you're assessing them on improvement. The other thing is growth and maturation, aka puberty. We don't want to assess students on improvement if they're growing 6 inches or gaining 10 pounds because they're hitting puberty. So so these are things we want them to improve, and that is a very important goal for us. We want to assess them maybe on their understanding of how they could make certain behavior choices to improve. And maybe that's a verbal question as they're in a game and you pull them out and you ask them verbally. Maybe it's an exit slip where you have little manila folders Velcroed along the floor or along the bottom wall of your gymnasium floor with pencils and scrap paper inside, where they can easily go to their spot at the end and grab a paper and a pencil that's there, so you don't have to pass anything out, and they draw something at a certain age, or maybe they write something at a certain age, or the kids who aren't at grade level for writing can come over and tell you verbally. So there are ways that we can ask them about their understanding of how to improve things, but we never want to assess them on it. And this is the best visual because I like to grow vegetables, and so I like this visual because the purpose to me of assessment is to increase quality, right? It's not to judge. So when I go out and I notice that my let's pick kale's wilting because in the heat in St. Louis it doesn't do as well as my basil or my tomatoes. So if I notice that it's wilting, it needs more water. So based on my observation, I need to, it's not thriving. It definitely needs more water. But yet at the same time, I need to get that basil out of the shade because it thrives in the heat. And same with my cherry tomatoes. And so not all plants need the same thing at the same time. Not all students need the same practice at the same speed at the same time. And there is nothing wrong with that. We are differentiating in our classrooms all the time. And we need to make sure that we're differentiating in physical education. And the students will support one another through that. And so I like to show this to parents. I like to show this to students. I showed this to my college students to say, when I give you feedback and when I assess you, it's to increase your quality. And this goes back to a very, very, maybe the most important point of the night, other than the definition of the word coach, is it really goes back to when we are assessing, is there really an end? If we're assessing the Gallup at elementary PE, and we assess them all, and that's something that we do in November, with all due respect, why the hell do we care if they Gallup by November? Can we not assess them again in March on the Gallup? And so really thinking about the fact that we may need to revisit things. Why I would love to see more physical education curriculum, especially at the elementary year, have 2-year clusters of curriculum and activities. And so that doesn't mean they do the exact same games and activities and dances and lessons in grade 2 and grade 3, but maybe the curricular outcomes are the exact same for 2 and 3. And then they get twice as many activities and twice as much opportunity to demonstrate proficiency in those activities. And then you're like, well, okay, then what? Well, so then you have a 2-year cluster of lesson plans. And then the next 2 years, you make more lesson plans. So you have this rotation, your A or your odd, your 2, you have 4 years of lessons all together, but it's really 2 clusters of 2. That sounds confusing. I'm visual. I'm going to make a visual for you and add it to the slides. But so just a few ground rules that I would always want to make sure. Students should always know when they're being assessed. It should never be a surprise. I do believe in teaching to the test physically. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I see. Students should always know teachers' expectations, the teaching cues, and the rubrics. And I just wanted to really include these for your own notes in the PDF of the slides. When we're talking, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. There's measurement, there's assessment and evaluation. And if we were in person, I'd have you talk to me about what are examples of each one. But since I'm talking to a screen and feeling silly about it, we're just going to go ahead, right? So a measurement is is an outcome. It's a score, right? And it is the result that you get through an assessment. The assessment is the activity or the means to collect a measure. So it might be a portfolio, it might be a 3v3 activity, it could be a timed run or walk, hopefully 8-12 minute. It could be a rubric related to locomotion or pathways. And then there's evaluation. And evaluation, depending on the system you're in, it could be a B-, it could be an 82%, it could be a pass. I can't believe I don't have it on here because I am such a big fan of proficiency-based or standards-based or outcome-based education. So if it was standards-based or proficiency-based, we would have proficient, or we would have emerging, or we would have advanced, or we might have beginner. So evaluation that's kind of where, that's mostly to see how our program is, which is why I don't like the B-, the 82%, or the pass as much as I would like something much more detailed where my students are proficient. When we are thinking about assessment, we want to first look at it in terms of, you have your curriculum, there's the books, then you have your assessment information. And so once you have your curriculum and you are gathering you're gathering measures through quality assessments, hopefully a balance of cognitive, so what they know, affective, and then also, of course, physical. Once we have those assessments, then we can differentiate the instruction, and that then equates to student learning. And here's the thing, people are, when I meet people and we get chatting for a while and they ask what I do for a living, and then they ask, oh, where'd you go to school? What you study? And they kind of make these like cheeky, like laugh, giggle, you have a PhD in gym, and I'm like, yeah, I just we do everything the classroom teachers do. But then we also do have to try to accomplish all those goals while our students are moving. And oftentimes moving with, physical education equipment. So you could say moving with weapons. And so it is challenging because we don't ever want to sacrifice learning. We want to give lots of opportunity to practice. We want it to be differentiated. And we can do this all through a lot of quality assessments, but it can be challenging. And I taught long enough to know that this isn't always easy. There's a lot of different challenges that we have to work through, but it comes down to that feeling of empowerment that we get from being physically active, that we get from being like on the right path on our own physical literacy journey. So like we can either sit back and say, I have too many students in my class, I don't see them enough, and or we can find ways to do the best that we can with what we have to best support students' learning and their physical literacy journey. So the first thing that I hear a lot about is, oh, I have a lot of students, so how do I assess 40 kids at the same time? I get that question a lot. So you might have a large number of students per grade level. Sometimes people have up to 80 kids in the class with 2 teachers, so how do you assess that? Assess them all at the same time in a meaningful way? And I would respond, you don't. There's no way you would assess them all at the same time. But you can, and I will give some suggestions, you wouldn't ever assess all of them at one time. So you would do some things that we'll talk about in a minute. Or you might have this problem. I don't have a very big teaching space, right? And so it's, again, that may present some challenges. Or maybe you don't see them often. Maybe you're like, I have PE once a week. Where are my students? Infrequent visits. So PE is often not mandated. It's sometimes recommended. And the question is, how do I have enough time? And really, you really want to teach students how to self-assess and peer assess so that they're constantly getting feedback from themselves and others, because if there's only one of you and you don't see them very often, you can use that as formative assessment and informal assessment. You want to use video periodically so you can review for assessment practices if you're allowed in your school. Have assessment stations so that students cycle through you. Again, collaborating with the classroom teachers is a really great means. And then you also want to think about Okay, am I assessing my students in a way that truly supports their physical literacy journey? Am I assessing them in water, in snow, in ice, and on land? And if not, is it even remotely close to being feasible to do so? And if so, where can I improve just a little bit? It might be a good little goal to think about. And then the learning domains. Am I gathering information in the following domains? Am I gathering measures or outputs or scores related to students' proficiency in terms of their physical domain, psychomotor, or their cognitive, or their affective, or their fitness? So am I gathering that information throughout the year? And if I am, what is it telling me? And how am I using it to guide my instruction? And how am I using it to differentiate my instruction for the different levels of my students? And so I just kind of threw in a couple little examples of ways that you can, specific things of what you would want to look for in each of those domains. This doesn't mean that you give a high grade to someone who says that they're physically active every day, but it does mean that I would suggest we're assessing our students on their understanding of why they should move their bodies every day for a certain amount of time. And can they identify at the little bitty ages, can you identify ways that you can move your body for health benefit? And that might mean I can jump rope because maybe they don't live on a street that's safe to be outside and play. So what are some ways that they can do this? So it's not just, are they doing it? Because unfortunately, we live in a society where oftentimes the kids who are doing it, it's because they have a lot of means and support to do so. It doesn't mean that they maybe wouldn't want to do it or that they don't value it. So we have to step back from thinking, okay, well, if you're moving, you're a good student, and more to like, what are the challenges that are potentially holding you back from moving often enough? And how can I, as your physical education teacher, help you? Can I lend out jump ropes for the weekend to help teach personal social responsibility and allow a child who values physical activity and has identified the fact that they want to do it, but maybe they live in a space where it's not safe to do so, to be outside or supervised or what have you. So some notes some questions from Carol Tomlinson and Tanya Moon. They were professors of mine at the University of Virginia, and they have a nice book out a few years ago now. But some of the questions that they pose that I want to pose to you, because I really like them, these questions are, how can assessment fuel students' curiosity? So really think about that. We say we want 21st century learners. And of course, 21st century learners are people who are creative and they think critically and they're curious and they are risk takers and they're problem solvers. Like this whole idea, you hear kids like, but why, mom? But why, dad? Why? And the parents like, just be quiet, who cares? But really, they come to us curious, just like they come to us wanting to move. That's why no one wants to sit close to me and my kids on a plane. They see us coming like, kids, plane, I don't want you to sit near us. But like we get upset with the fact that they come with all these great qualities of being curious and wanting to move, and then we ruin them. So now how can we stop doing that? And how can we kind of resist this tidal wave of everyone telling them that the things that they do are wonderful are actually really annoying to them? And how can we use assessment to fuel their curiosity? So ask yourself, tomorrow when you're teaching, how can you use it to fuel their curiosity? How can assessment sharpen my clarity about what matters most in physical education and the topics that we explore? So it's another question for you, okay, to ask yourself related to your students. How can assessment contribute to my belief that each of my students has capacity to learn what matters most in physical education? So are we really prioritizing? Are we assessing what we think we should just because that's what we've always done? Or can we use assessment as a way to really help students learn what we want them to learn the most? Have you identified that at each grade level? Or each grade level cluster, if you're hopping on my train for that one, have we identified what is the most important and how are we using assessment practices to get there? And how can assessment help teach help the students I teach captain their successes as learners in physical education and throughout their physical literacy journey. So how is it making them think more about the subject field as a whole? In what ways might assessment contribute to my understanding of the similarities and differences that students bring to my class, to knowing each of them as individuals? Are we using it as a way to know our students better? I know it's not easy. Some of us teaching several hundred kids a year. You know, how can we use it to find out their little titty bits of information? What I love so much about coaching, you know, this fall again, and being with kids again in that role, was getting to know their funny personalities and what, you know, when you have 15 kids on a team, you can really do that. And so how can we, if we have big class sizes or don't see them often, how can we get to peek into that? How can we peek in? Is it a survey home to parents at the beginning of the year using Google Form? You know, how can, that is a measure, that is collecting information to help us guide our instruction. So really getting away from, okay, is your knee at a 90-degree angle? And some of those things are, of course, very important, but also thinking about it in the broader context, because it doesn't matter how quality your lessons are. If you don't know these kids, if they don't think you know them, if they don't think you care about them, no one's going to ever even hear you say 90-degree angle, you know? So also, how can this was a question I wanted to add, how can I ensure my assessment practices are fun and allow for students to be physically active at moderate to vigorous intensities at frequencies and durations that aid health? So what can we, that, you know, it's not easy, right? But if we'll know if it's fun. And I'm going to say this, okay, and time is flying by, but one of the things I want to say real quick, because I want to make sure I leave time for questions and discussion at the end. If your kids are coming down and saying, can't we just play? Or if it's gymnastics, a version of that, or dance, a version of that, like dance, can we dance? Can we play? Can we move? If they're saying that to you a lot, then you're not letting them play or dance or perform enough, right? Do you ever have the teammate who was like really good in practice, but couldn't always put it together in a game? So they might be a rock star in practice, if, like, I'm just using a sport analogy, but in a game, maybe weren't able to win the 50-50 ball ever, right? So really, I don't care what they look like going through cones. Like, I want to see them playing with each other because that's more fun, right? I got to, like, don't you have fun when you play? Don't you have fun when you play? Would you have fun going through cones at your age right now? Like, I'm 41. Like, it wouldn't be really fun for me to go through some cones with soccer ball, but you put me in a game and I'm going to giggle, and it's going to bring back, it's going to feel childlike. It's play, right? So think about that with your physical assessment practices. Really think about that. So, you know, you got to be creative with it, and you really need to collaborate. And that's with classroom teachers again, with your PE, PLN, maybe you're sharing best assessment. Maybe there's a folder where everyone shares some quality assessment practices. If you do that, don't just put it in and think it's great, or just don't put it in and then want people to tell you it's great. Put it in and invite people to give you feedback, okay? It's another means of assessment. And we want our kids to take risks, which I certainly hope we do. We need to take risks, and we need to get out of our box. This is something that is, I'm flying now. Sorry, I'm really going to talk fast. we can't we have to stop thinking that equal is right, and we need to start thinking more about the equitable piece, because we don't care, again, if they have the overhand throw by October or June. We want them to get it over a period of time, which is again why I want you to think about elementary PE in two grade level clusters at a time. So you have over 2 years, there's a series of skills that we think are, you know, very important to foster, and you keep revisiting them. You keep revisiting them. You keep revisiting them. I use this analogy. I was an anatomy lab demonstrator in undergrad, and so I took anatomy one year and I passed it. And then the next year I worked in the lab as a demonstrator. Well, when I went back the next year to work as a demonstrator, because I had to help students make sure they knew the material, I actually studied why, what the words actually meant for all the bones. And I really could understand it better because I revisited the material. If I didn't take that job because I really needed money and it was the only job I could get, it was $362 for the whole term. It wasn't a lot, but it made me really understand anatomy instead of memorizing it. And so this idea that something has to be proficient by a certain month and never revisiting it or using it again throughout the school year is really unfortunate. And I know when we see them once a week or twice a week, it's not easy to revisit things, but I want you to challenge yourself to work with your colleagues, to look at your yearly plan or to look at a 2-year cluster and see how you could do that more. I'm going to skip over because I don't think we need to go over norm and criterion. Just think of always, so the debate then kind of becomes this. Are we going to kind of get rid of summative assessments? Are they now obsolete? And just stick with formative assessments, which is this feedback loop with the formative that gives you gives the feedback is the measures from the assessment, which then helps the teacher differentiate instruction and then helps the student learn. And so here's some different ways. There's some different assessments that I list in this. You have the PDF of this, and it's just a way to just to start. This is so far from extensive, but just some different ways to think about, maybe doing all these, maybe you could try some of these. But I always, would have an assessment station and like, what did Coach Stanec teach me today? Or you would start it off at the elementary prompt. When I taught elementary, it was like, I'm smart. This is what I learned today. And just little ways to gather information. Another kind of, I think, a very meaningful assessment was actually a formative assessment, and it really had nothing to do with their learning, but I kept a little box at the top of the ramp where the kids would come into my gym when I taught at Red Hill Elementary in Virginia, Albemarle County, Virginia, and it was just how am I feeling today? And the idea was they learned to leave their trash at the door. So if they're having a bad day, they could try to compartmentalize it. But what I thought was the genius of this idea, which is probably someone else's idea because I am far from genius, is I could see if somebody had a kind of a really upset looking face and they would stop and jot something down on a piece of scrap paper and put it in the little Tupperware bin that I had. And so they could all come in and start with their instant activity and they were all moving, but then I could go and I could look at that student and say, I noticed you left something at the door. I hope you can enjoy this class. I want you to know I care about you. And so I told them, I will read those. They're not something that I won't read. But it was a nice way. And then concurrently they would, as they were leaving the gymnasium, they could leave something. So if something went bad in class or if something wasn't quite right with them, they could put it down and I could also read that in feedback. That gave me a lot of information on my helpful information to form really positive relationships with my students. And I will also say that it helped them because I made the connection. Like in life, you can have a really bad moments to a day, but you don't want it to make it result in a really bad day. So bad moments don't have to lead to a bad day. And sometimes we have to compartmentalize that, which is just a really good life skill for all of us. Because I'm sure I'm not alone when something might go wrong in work and I got to like walk in and be there for my family and positive and optimistic. So it's a great skill, and it's not, of course, related necessarily to a learning outcome, but a lot of the best experiences, while that is so critical, a lot of the most important experiences our students are going to remember from us as physical education teachers and coaches is not related to that, right? It is related to the relationship piece. And so when we're looking at how to teach a whole bunch of students at one time, don't do it. Pick have a little section of your students, and when they're all participating, keep an eye on one area and give those students feedback that particular day. Or you may want to identify 4 students, and this is all related to some systematic observation work. Hans van der Mars was kind of inspired a lot of this in me in my early years in teaching, but identify a student maybe with a special need, one who's beginner skill level, one who is quite emerging or close to proficient, and then one who is proficient, and then see what's their success rate in this activity. And that's going to tell you if you're offering enough differentiate instruction. Maybe somebody needs to be invited to just use a non-dominant foot, or maybe somebody needs to be told that they should only have an object in hand for 2 seconds, or maybe 1 touch versus 3 touch. So how are the different, maybe somebody needs a beach ball and somebody else needs a tennis ball. So what are some ways we can differentiate instruction if we're noticed the success rate is nowhere near the magic 80% for any of the different learning levels in our classes? We can also set up stations for assessment. Again, thinking about the ground rules, but maybe there's a self-assessment video where they get instant feedback. I don't like to mess with screens in the room because I feel like it just takes too much time. But if you like that kind of thing and you're really good at it, and you might think I'm antiquated by saying that, but whatever. And then there's peer assessment at the next one, and then maybe an exit slip. Now you could do an enter slip or an exit slip, and then you could have jump ropes right there. So it doesn't mean they sit there and write the whole time. They answer it and then they get up and move on. If you didn't want to have it all along the perimeter floor or a different activity, you might have an alternative assessment set up. You might have a teacher assessment, 2 teachers assessment, 2 authentic environments. Maybe there's a gymnastics routine that they have to choreograph and perform, or a dance routine that they're performing. And so you're standing with your back to open to all of them over in this lower left corner, and you're able to assess those 2 bottom left cells, but then you're also able to, of course, be able to scan everywhere for safety reasons. The other thing is you can have it set up, these authentic environments. If you were doing a teaching games for understanding unit, you may have invasion games. You might have a soccer at one station. You might have a floor hockey at a station. You might have a field hockey at a station. You might have a lacrosse at a station. You might have a basketball at a station. You can have all kinds of little 3v3s or 2v2s, different type modified games, all working on the same tactics. This, of course, would be more 4th grade and up if we're doing teaching games for understanding. But then looking at maybe we're assessing sending and receiving objects in authentic environments, which means in a game-like environment or a real-life setting. And so now we are able to assess their ability to send and receive, otherwise known as pass, right, and trap. But we're looking at people sending and receiving in these authentic environments that all differ each other. So communication, all of these things that we're able to assess while they get to play, while they get to move, while they get to perform, which is so much more fun. So we do need to have a balance. Of course, I mentioned dancing routines, and I mentioned gymnastics routines. And then, of course, with the outdoor pursuits, whatever authentic, whatever that might look like, is important to try to do it where they're having a lot of fun, whether it is whether it's a martial art. That's person on the skateboard should have a helmet on. I'll have to, and the same with the kayak, if that's whitewater, which it kind of looks like it could be. So I'm going to add that next time. But we want to measure student growth. We absolutely do. The big question is how to measure. So, we have to acknowledge that we don't want kids writing 80% of their class time PE. Moving helps brain cells to grow and helps decrease anxiety, stress, and helps kids be more ready to learn. So we have to hold firm and be creative in how we document the student growth and in the physical education sector. And again, all of this is so important, and we have to be innovative, but we have to acknowledge the gap due to poverty or lack of opportunity for so many. Many extracurricular is very expensive. And so this is when I think, when we think of the flipped classroom approach and technology, we do have to understand that while many kids may have access, there are also many who may not. So consider stations in the classroom where a few stations are set up so that students can share evidence or collect evidence. This is, again, collaborating with classroom teachers, collaborate on thematic units so evidence can be shared and used as assessments in multiple categories. So I'm not going to go into different ways that you can use tech to assess. There are many ways. And, but I'm going to go back to this idea, really challenging us to spend the most of our energy on relationships and empowering them to know that it's okay not to be on it. And that's not anti-tech. That's just pro-connection, and we want to be empathetic. We want to learn about each other, and we got to slow that tech train down. So let's ask ourselves some hard questions. And thinking back to the toddlers always asking why, we don't want to squash it. We want to encourage our students to ask us why. We want them to challenge us, and we want to continue asking why ourselves. Why am I teaching this? What should I assess? Why would I choose that to assess? What will I do with this information? If you're assessing to write a number down in a book, don't bother. Assess to gather information, to differentiate instruction, to guide your teaching, to support student learning. And sorry, I didn't leave a lot of time, but I will give you some time if you have some questions.
Hey, Amanda, thanks for that awesome presentation. So if you guys have questions, you can just type them in on the chat side right now. I know I have one off the bat, talking about that idea of clustering like K1 together, 2, 3 together, 4, 5 together for elementary, and then kind of using like an even year, odd year curriculum to kind of switch things up within those 2-year kind of clusters, and the idea of a looping curriculum.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are moving more towards that. I know Kevin Tiller, I think, is one in particular at Phys Ed Review on Twitter here. He's said a lot of good things about it, and it's something that I want to explore a little bit more. Have you done that in your teaching with your college students even, or even when you were back teaching in the classroom? How did you find success with that?
Yeah, I wanted to do it when so I taught for 5 years, but I wasn't in a position, I didn't have any control over my units during those first 5 years. It was kind of set, and there were 6 of us, and the yearly plan was established at that school. And then I after those 5 years, I went back to school full time, and then I took a job as a professor back home in Canada. And then after 3 years as a professor, encouraging people, and actually when they would do their yearly plans, I would require the elementary students to send me these clusters in terms of a yearly plan before they went to interview. They had to submit that to me. And then I took a job when I moved back to the US. I was lucky to teach at this elementary school that year, but then we moved to Colorado, and I stayed home with my children for a few years. And so I had the plan to do the cluster. I really believe in the cluster. I didn't know Kevin was doing it. I'm really excited to hear that, because I have been encouraging people to go this way for a long time, and I can't wait to, I'm going to find out. I want to talk to him more about it. So thank you for sharing that. But I just thought you can it makes it more meaningful, and then they're exposed to twice as many activities. And for 1 year, just think of the time setting up and setting down. I mean, for 4th and 5th, if the setup is the same, but then the next year, everything they experience is completely different. I would be really jazzed to talk to more people. I think that's a good study for someone in grad school.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I know Kevin's doing some really cool things with it. I had a chance to do it a little bit when I taught out in Iowa. But kind of like you, since I've moved to Maryland, with the way things are and scheduling things, and the fact that it wasn't just me for the past 7 years in the gym. We were pretty much doubled throughout the time in there, 2 classes at the same time. That obviously makes things more challenging. But now the situation's a little bit more different. So I'm constantly looking for different ways to do things. And that's kind of one thing I'm looking at in particular moving forward, maybe into next year, that looping idea for the curriculum. I like that, really. I think it's a really intriguing thing that has my brain going a little bit. So thank you for sharing about that. It's really neat.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you want to chat another time about it. And I can even look for the examples that I have on my old computer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like there's not really too many other questions on here. There was some good conversations about focusing on the why and just constantly reflecting and fostering, like you said, our students' creativity, curiosity, because at the end of the day, that's what we really want them to be, moving forward with, is asking those questions, because as they get older, they should be constantly doing that same thing. So we want them to be doing that when they get older. It's good to get in the habit of them asking the why and not just shutting it down, like you mentioned, fostering that.
Yeah, and then likewise, yeah, absolutely. And likewise, like us as teachers, stepping back each year and saying, why? Like, why am I doing this assessment?
Yeah.
Because if I'm not using it to build a relationship, guide my instruction, differentiate instruction to support students' learning, why bother? Like, if I'm just doing it to say I did it, then just stop and just find something else that can be much more meaningful to everyone. And it will make it more fun for you and your students. Yeah.
Like you said, if you're just doing it for a number and just to get a grade, you're probably doing more harm than good, to be honest. And we certainly don't need any more of that in our profession with perception that we currently have as it is. So I agree with you 100% on that. So everyone's saying you did a great job.
Oh, they're nice. Are they using a hashtag or something? Is there a hashtag?
In the chat, Adam Metcalf says, great job, Amanda. I love your passion. Ryan Jaco, thanks, Amanda. Patty Kestel, love your session. Good food for thought. Give her a chance to reflect on her current assessment practices. Yeah, so they're in the chat right there, guys. There's your certificate of participation. You can click on that. You can print it out for your records, or if you need to prove to someone that you did some PD on your own. Amanda, is there somewhere you can post this, like a PDF of this or something, so I can give people a link, because people were asking about that a little bit?
Yeah, some of these images I've purchased, and so there's copyright stuff, but I put a PDF of this presentation up in a folder that I know Matt will have the link to. Okay. And or I believe that he was going to put it on if you click on the resources from that site that he had.
Yeah, I clicked on that, but it wasn't
there.
It just had a blank Google Doc.
Yeah, probably because I only put it there today. I've been, as I mentioned, coaching. I was coaching and stuff this weekend.
Yeah. So we'll get it out. If you guys are looking for that, we'll get it out to you.
Okay. And there was really nothing really groundbreaking or innovative in this. I was just trying to most of the people who are listening, maybe it's just affirming, but sometimes it's nice to be affirmed, but I think that if we can, just step back and reflect on what it is we're doing, ask ourselves why we're doing it, ask ourselves is it working. And if people aren't smiling and you're not smiling, then let's just try something else. That was really a big message that I wanted to help. And I would love to engage with anybody in these chats about, if there's specific questions that come up, whether me or somebody else who, like you, Ross, or somebody else involved who was listening tonight, feel free to share really great practices that are happening.
Yep. So if you guys want to connect further, like Amanda said, her Twitter handle is @MoveLiveLearn. She's more than happy to kind of connect with you on there, as is anyone on the ESPEChat team. We thank you guys for tuning in tonight. And Amanda, thank you so much for giving up your time to present on this super important topic. I think it was very valuable for everyone that tuned in. And remember, we have 2 sessions each night for the next few days, all the way through Thursday of this week. If you're looking for some more professional development for our Phys Ed Summit as it continues, 8 p.m. Eastern each night. We have some great presenters and sessions lined up for you each night. So definitely tune back in. Amanda, thank you very much again.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Stop sharing my screen. Yeah, it was great. Ross, thanks for moderating, buddy, and for coming on to make sure our technology was all working well and all that. So I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
See ya.